The dust kicked up around Violet Reeves's worn boots as she stumbled out of the third shop in Empire City, Nevada. Her mother's labored breathing echoing in her memory like a death knell she couldn't silence. The year was 1884, and the high desert sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden storefronts lining the main street, each door that had closed in her face feeling like another nail in her mother's coffin. She had begged the doctor, pleaded with the pharmacist, even tried to reason with the general store owner, but without money, without credit, without anything to trade, no one would spare her the medicine that could save the only family she had left in this unforgiving world. Violet pressed her back against the hot wood of the building behind her, squeezing her eyes shut against the tears that threatened to spill. She was 22 years old and had never felt more helpless in her entire life. Her father had died 2 winters ago in a mining accident, leaving them with nothing but debts and broken promises. She and her mother had scraped by doing laundry, mending clothes, taking in whatever work they could find, but it was never enough. And now, with her mother burning up with fever in their tiny room above the saloon, time was running out like sand through an hourglass. "Miss, you all right there?" The voice was deep and concerned, tinged with a slight Texas drawl that spoke of long trails and open spaces. Violet opened her eyes to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his weathered face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of lean muscle that came from years of hard work. His clothes were dusty from travel, but his eyes were kind, a warm brown that reminded her of the oak trees back in Missouri before they'd come west chasing fool's gold. "I'm fine," she said automatically, straightening up and wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "Thank you for your concern." But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her, and she saw something shift in the stranger's expression. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, damp with sweat from the heat. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with sun-bronzed skin and the kind of face that had seen its share of hard times but hadn't turned bitter from them. "Begging your pardon, miss, but you don't look fine at all," he said gently. "Name's Zachary Houston. Just rode in about an hour ago. Is there something I can help with?" Violet shook her head, pride warring with desperation in her chest. She didn't know this man, didn't owe him anything, and he didn't owe her. But there was something in his eyes, something genuine, that made her want to trust him. Maybe it was the desperation talking, or maybe it was the way he stood there, not crowding her, not demanding anything, just offering. "My mother," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "She's sick, real sick, has been for 3 days now. Fever, chills, coughing up blood. The doctor says it's pneumonia, says she needs medicine or she'll die. But I don't have the money, and no one in this town will extend credit to a woman with nothing to her name. I've tried everywhere, begged everyone, but they all turned me away." Zachary's jaw tightened, and he settled his hat back on his head. "Show me where the doctor is." "I can't pay you back," Violet said quickly, her heart leaping with hope even as her mind tried to protect her from another disappointment. "I don't have anything. I can work, I can clean, I can cook, but I can't pay you today." "Didn't ask you to," Zachary said simply. "Now we're wasting time your mama doesn't have. Let's go." He started walking down the street with long, purposeful strides, and after a moment of stunned hesitation, Violet hurried after him. She had to nearly run to keep up with his pace, her skirts swishing around her ankles, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like hope. They reached Dr. Thornton's office, the same door that had been shut in her face not 20 minutes ago, and Zachary pushed it open without knocking. Dr. Thornton looked up from his desk, his expression already set in the dismissive frown he'd worn when he'd sent Violet away. "I told you, Miss Reeves, I cannot simply give away medicine. This is a business, not a charity house." "How much does she need?" Zachary asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that made the doctor sit up straighter. "I beg your pardon, the medicine. For her mother." "How much does she need, and how much does it cost?" Dr. Thornton's eyes narrowed, taking in Zachary's dusty clothes, the worn but well-maintained gun belt at his hip, the quiet confidence in his stance. $7 for a full course of treatment. That includes the quinine, the laudanum for pain, and the tonic to help with the cough. Violet's stomach dropped. $7 might as well have been $700 for all the chance she had of getting it. But Zachary just reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn leather pouch. He counted out the money carefully, his fingers moving with the ease of someone who'd handled countless transactions on countless trails, and laid it on the doctor's desk. "There's your $7, Zachary said. "Now get the medicine, doctor." Thornton stared at the money for a long moment, then sighed and rose from his chair. He went to the cabinet behind his desk and began pulling out bottles and packets, wrapping them carefully in brown paper. When he handed the bundle to Violet, his expression was slightly less hostile than before, but not by much. "Give her a spoonful of the quinine every 4 hours. The laudanum only if the pain is severe. And the tonic should be taken 3 times a day with meals." Violet clutched the precious package to her chest, unable to form words around the lump in her throat. Zachary tipped his hat to the doctor and held the door open for her, following her back out into the brutal afternoon sun. She stood there on the wooden walkway, looking at this stranger who had just given $7 to someone he'd never met before, for a woman he'd never seen, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much. I'll find a way to pay you back, I swear it." "Let's worry about getting that medicine to your mama first," Zachary said. "Where are you staying?" "Above the $Silver Saloon. End of the street. Lead the way." They walked together through the dusty streets of Empire City, past the assayer's office and the feed store, past the handful of miners and cowboys who loitered in the shade, watching them with idle curiosity. Violet was intensely aware of Zachary beside her, this stranger who had become her salvation in the space of a few breathless minutes. She wanted to ask him why, wanted to understand what would make a man help someone he didn't know, but she was afraid that asking might break whatever spell had made this possible. The $Silver Saloon was quiet at this hour, the afternoon lull between the lunch crowd and the evening drinkers. Violet led Zachary around to the side entrance and up the narrow stairs to the tiny room she shared with her mother. The space was barely big enough for the 2 narrow beds and a washstand, with one small window that let in more heat than light. Her mother lay on the far bed, her face flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rattling in her chest. "Mama," Violet said softly, kneeling beside the bed. "Mama, I got the medicine. You're going to be all right." Her mother's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Violet." "Baby, is that you?" "Yes, Mama, I'm here. And I brought help." Zachary had removed his hat and stood near the door, giving them space but ready to assist if needed. Violet unwrapped the medicine with shaking hands, reading the labels carefully before measuring out the first dose of quinine. Her mother grimaced at the bitter taste but swallowed obediently, too weak to do much else. "There's water in the pitcher," Violet said, glancing back at Zachary. "Could you?" He moved immediately, pouring fresh water into the chipped cup on the washstand and bringing it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it from him, and Violet felt a strange warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the stifling heat of the room. She helped her mother drink, then administered the tonic, following the doctor's instructions precisely. "She needs to rest now," Zachary said quietly. "The medicine will take time to work." Violet nodded, brushing damp hair back from her mother's forehead. Already, she thought she could see some of the tension easing from the older woman's face, though she knew it might just be wishful thinking. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt, and turned to face her unexpected benefactor. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she said. "You've saved her life. You've saved both our lives." "You don't need to thank me," Zachary said. "Just glad I was in the right place at the right time." "But why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for strangers? $7 is a lot of money." Zachary was quiet for a moment, turning his hat over in his hands. "Had a sister once," he said finally. "Younger than me by 5 years. Got sick when she was about 16, same kind of thing, fever and cough. We were on a cattle drive, middle of nowhere, no doctor for 50 miles. By the time we got her to town, it was too late. I was 18, thought I was so grown, but I couldn't do a damn thing to help her. Couldn't save her." His voice was rough with old pain, and Violet felt her heart clench in sympathy. "I'm so sorry." "Was a long time ago," Zachary said, but his eyes told a different story. "But I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would. Money can be earned again. A life can't be brought back." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. This man, this stranger, had walked into her life at her darkest moment and brought light with him. Not just the medicine, but hope, kindness, compassion in a world that had shown her precious little of any of those things lately. "Will you stay?" she asked impulsively. "Just for a little while. I should sit with her, make sure the fever breaks, and I could use the company." "If you don't have somewhere else to be, I mean." Zachary glanced at the window, gauging the angle of the sun, then back at Violet. "I've got nowhere pressing to be. Came to Empire City looking for work, but that can wait until tomorrow." "There's not much space," Violet said, suddenly aware of how small and shabby their room must look to him. "But you're welcome to that chair if you want it." "Chair's fine by me. Spent the last 3 weeks sleeping on the ground. This'll be downright luxurious." He settled into the rickety wooden chair with a grace that spoke of long practice making do with whatever accommodations were available. Violet sat on the edge of her own bed, close enough to reach her mother if needed, and for a while they simply sat in companionable silence, listening to the older woman's labored breathing gradually begin to ease. "Tell me about yourself," Zachary said after a while. "How'd you end up in Empire City?" Violet sighed, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. "My father brought us here 4 years ago. He'd heard about the silver strikes, thought he'd make our fortune. Bought himself a claim and worked it every day until the accident. Turned out the mine he was working in wasn't properly shored up. Collapsed on him and 3 other men." "I'm sorry," Zachary said and meant it. "Mama and I tried to make it work after that. We took in laundry, did mending, whatever we could find. But this town isn't kind to women alone. The decent work goes to men or to women with families to vouch for them. We've been barely scraping by, and when Mama got sick, I thought that was it. Thought we were done for." "But you didn't give up," Zachary observed. "You kept trying, kept asking for help. What else could I do?" "She's my mother. She's all I have left in this world." Zachary nodded slowly. "Family's important. Don't have much of my own left anymore. Parents passed when I was younger, sister gone, no wife or children. Been drifting from place to place, working where I can, moving on when the work dries up or when I get restless." "Sounds lonely," Violet said softly. "It is," Zachary admitted. "Been thinking lately that maybe it's time to settle down somewhere, put down roots." but it's hard to know where you belong when you've been moving for so long." They talked through the afternoon, their voices low so as not to disturb the sleeping woman. Violet told him about growing up in Missouri, about the farm her grandparents had owned, about the books she'd loved to read before they'd had to sell them all. Zachary told her about learning to rope and ride on a ranch in Texas, about the cattle drives he'd been on, about seeing the ocean for the first time in California, and thinking it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever witnessed. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky outside their small window in shades of orange and gold, Violet rose to check on her mother. The older woman's forehead was cooler to the touch, and her breathing had evened out considerably. Relief flooded through Violet so intensely that her knees went weak. "The fever's breaking," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's actually working." Zachary stood, coming to stand beside her and looking down at the sleeping woman. "She's got your eyes," he said. "Or I guess you've got hers." "People always said I looked like her," Violet said. "Same dark hair, same stubborn chin. She's the strongest woman I know. If anyone can fight this off, she can. With the medicine and her daughter's care, I'd say her odds are pretty good." They administered another dose of medicine as the sun set, and Violet's mother woke enough to recognize her daughter and ask, in a weak voice, who the tall man was. Violet explained, keeping it simple, and her mother's eyes filled with tears as she grasped Zachary's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "God bless you, young man." "Just doing what's right, madam," Zachary said, his own voice rough with emotion. "You rest now and get better." As night fell over Empire City, Violet insisted that Zachary go get some supper while she stayed with her mother. He hesitated, clearly not wanting to leave, but she pressed a few precious coins into his hand, money she'd been saving for emergencies. "Please," she said. "You've done so much for us. Let me at least feed you." He returned an hour later with not just food for himself but a basket containing bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jar of soup that was still warm. "Thought you might be hungry too," he said. "Can't remember the last time I saw you eat." They shared the simple meal while Violet's mother slept peacefully, the worst of the crisis past. As they ate, Violet found herself studying Zachary's face in the lamplight, noticing things she hadn't before. The small scar above his left eyebrow. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The gentleness in his hands as he broke the bread, the same hands that could handle a horse or a gun with equal skill. "You're staring," Zachary said, amusement coloring his tone. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Sorry. I was just thinking how lucky we were that you came along when you did." "I'm starting to think I'm the lucky one," Zachary said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Been drifting for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. To be able to help someone and make a real difference." "You've made more than a difference," Violet said softly. "You've given us hope. You've shown us kindness when everyone else turned their backs. That's not something I'll ever forget." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken but powerful. Zachary reached across the small space separating them and took Violet's hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I'd like to stay," he said. "Not just tonight, but longer. Help you take care of your mama until she's back on her feet. Make sure you're both all right." "You don't have to do that," Violet said, even as her heart leaped at the prospect. "You've already done so much." "I want to," Zachary said firmly. "Can't explain it, but from the moment I saw you standing there on that street, looking so lost and determined at the same time, I felt something. Like maybe I'd been traveling all these years just to end up in Empire City at exactly that moment. To meet you." Violet squeezed his hand, afraid to trust what she was hearing, afraid to hope for something more than just gratitude. "I felt it too," she admitted. "Thought I was being foolish, but there was something about you right from the start." They sat there in the lamplight, hands clasped, while outside the sounds of Empire City's nightlife drifted up from the saloon below. Piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses. But in their small room there was only peace and the beginning of something that felt like it might be destiny. Zachary ended up spending the night in that uncomfortable chair, dozing fitfully while Violet kept watch over her mother and administered medicine on schedule. Every time she moved, he woke instantly, alert and ready to help, and Violet found herself touched by his dedication. He could have left hours ago, could have found a proper bed at the boarding house, but he'd chosen to stay with them instead. By morning, the transformation in Violet's mother was remarkable. The fever had broken completely during the night, and though she was still weak, her eyes were clear and her breathing was strong. She woke asking for water and food, both signs that the worst was truly over. "You're going to be all right, Mama," Violet said, crying tears of joy as she hugged her mother carefully. "You're going to be just fine." "Thanks to you and your friend," her mother said, looking past Violet to where Zachary stood stretching the kinks out of his back from a night in the chair. "I don't even know your name, young man." "Zachary Houston, madam, and helping your daughter take care of you has been my pleasure." Over the next 3 days, Zachary proved himself to be as good as his word. He found work at the livery stable, earning enough to pay for a room at the boarding house, but spending most of his time at the small room above the saloon, helping Violet care for her mother. He fetched water, brought food, ran errands, and sat with the older woman so Violet could get some much-needed rest. As Violet's mother grew stronger, the relationship between Violet and Zachary deepened. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on things both important and trivial. Zachary admitted that he'd always wanted to have a ranch of his own someday, a place to raise horses and maybe cattle. Violet confessed that she'd always dreamed of having a real home again, with a garden and room to breathe. "Sounds like we want similar things," Zachary observed one evening as they sat on the steps outside the saloon, watching the stars come out over the desert. "Sounds like we do," Violet agreed, her heart beating faster. "Violet," Zachary said, turning to face her fully. "I know this is fast, probably too fast, but I've never been one to dance around the truth. These past few days with you have been the best I've had in longer than I can remember. I feel like I've known you my whole life, like everything before this was just marking time until I found you." Violet's breath caught in her throat. "Zachary, I feel the same way. I never believed in love at first sight, thought it was just something in those novels I used to read. But from the moment you stopped to help me, from the moment you showed such kindness to strangers, I felt something change inside me." "I'm not a rich man," Zachary said. "Don't have much more than what you see. But I'm a hard worker, and I'm honest, and I would spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you and your mama are taken care of. Would do everything in my power to make you happy." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Violet whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Violet Reeves. I'm saying that I want to stay in Empire City or go wherever you want to go and build a life together. I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your husband." Violet felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming happiness. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Zachary, I'll marry you. I love you too. I think I started loving you the moment you asked if you could help." Zachary pulled her into his arms, and they kissed there on the steps under the endless Nevada sky. sealing a promise that had been forged in desperation and kindness, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. When they told Violet's mother the next day, she cried and laughed and hugged them both, declaring it the best medicine she could have asked for. "I knew it," she said. "Knew it from the moment I saw how he looked at you. You're going to be happy together, I can feel it." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the little church on the edge of town, with Violet's mother well enough to attend, and a handful of new friends Zachary had made at the livery. Violet wore a dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Zachary had ridden out into the desert to pick for her. It wasn't a fancy wedding, but it was perfect, full of love and promise and hope for the future. Zachary continued working at the livery while he and Violet saved every penny they could. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, modest but clean, with room enough for Violet's mother and space for a garden that Violet immediately began planning. The work was hard, but they were happy, deliriously so, finding joy in the simple act of building a life together. 6 months after their wedding, Violet's mother announced that she'd been offered a position as a housekeeper for one of the wealthier families in town, a sign that her health had fully returned. "I won't be a burden on you newlyweds forever," she insisted, despite their protests. "You've taken such good care of me, but it's time I started taking care of myself again." With the extra income from both Zachary's work and her mother's new position, they were able to start seriously saving for Zachary's dream of owning land. They scoured the territory, looking for the right place, somewhere with good water and grazing, close enough to town to sell their goods but far enough out to have room to grow. 1 year after Zachary had walked into Violet's life, they stood on a ridge overlooking a valley about 15 miles from Empire City. A stream ran through it, fed by mountain springs that never ran dry. The grass was thick and green, unusual for Nevada, and there were enough trees to provide shade and shelter. It was perfect, and miraculously it was available. "We could build right there," Zachary said, pointing to a flat area near the stream. "House with a big porch, barn for the horses, maybe some chickens and a milk cow to start. Eventually get some cattle." "It's beautiful," Violet breathed, able to see it all in her mind's eye. "It's everything we talked about." They bought the land with the money they'd saved, along with a small loan from the bank that Zachary was confident he could pay back within a few years. Then began the backbreaking work of building their dream. Zachary worked during the days at the livery and on their land in the evenings and on Sundays, slowly raising the frame of a house. Violet helped when she could, bringing water and food, holding boards steady, learning to handle tools she'd never touched before. The community rallied around them in ways that surprised them both. Men from the livery came out to help raise the walls. Women from the church brought food and supplies. Even Violet's mother spent her days off helping to chink the gaps between logs and sew curtains for windows that didn't exist yet. It seemed that Zachary's kindness and Violet's determination had made an impression on Empire City, and people were eager to help the young couple who were working so hard to build something lasting. By the time autumn arrived, painting the cottonwoods along the stream in shades of gold, they had a house. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was solid and warm and theirs. 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft above, a stone fireplace that Zachary had built with his own hands. They moved in on a crisp October day, carrying their few possessions across the threshold together, laughing and crying at the same time. That first night in their own home, lying in their own bed with the stars visible through the window above them, Zachary pulled Violet close and kissed her hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Violet asked, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "For trusting me that day in town, for letting me help, for giving me a reason to stop drifting and start living." "I should be thanking you," Violet said. "You saved my mother's life." "You saved mine too, in a way. Before you came along, I didn't think I had anything to look forward to except struggle and hardship. You showed me that there was still good in the world, still kindness. You gave me hope and love and a future I never dreamed possible." "We gave each other those things," Zachary said. "That's what love is supposed to do, make both people better, stronger." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and secure in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious in this harsh land. The next few years were full of hard work, but also profound satisfaction. Zachary quit the livery and devoted himself full-time to building their ranch. He bought their first few horses, good breeding stock with solid bloodlines, and began building a reputation for quality animals. Violet discovered she had a talent for training, working with the young horses with patience and gentleness that brought out the best in them. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added cattle, just a small herd to start, and chickens that provided eggs for their table and extras to sell in town. Violet's garden flourished, providing vegetables through the summer that she canned for the winter months. They worked sun-up to sundown most days, but they worked together, and that made all the difference. Violet's mother visited often, sometimes staying for weeks at a time, and her presence added to the sense of family and home they were building. She delighted in telling anyone who would listen about how her daughter had found true love with the cowboy who'd saved her life, turning their story into something of a local legend. 3 years after their wedding, Violet discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with joy and not a little fear. The nearest doctor was still in Empire City, 15 miles away, and childbirth was always dangerous on the frontier. But Violet's mother moved to the ranch immediately, determined to be there for her daughter, and the women in the church promised to help when the time came. Their son was born on a spring morning when the desert was in bloom, arriving healthy and squalling into a world that was ready to welcome him. Zachary held the tiny infant in his large, work-roughened hands and cried without shame, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this little person who was part of him and part of Violet. "What should we name him?" Violet asked, exhausted but radiant from her bed. "Was thinking maybe James," Zachary said. "After your father, give him a connection to the grandfather he'll never meet." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "James Zachary Houston, that's perfect." Little James proved to be a happy baby, content to watch his parents work from a basket in the shade or sleep through the sounds of ranch life. As he grew, he became a fixture around the property, toddling after his father to feed the horses, helping his mother gather eggs, delighting in every aspect of the life his parents had built. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Alina, after Zachary's mother. She had Violet's dark eyes and her father's easy temperament, and from the start, she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger. James, at 2, took his role as big brother seriously, constantly wanting to help care for his baby sister. The ranch continued to prosper. Zachary's horses gained a reputation throughout Nevada and into California for being well-trained and dependable. Buyers came from as far away as San Francisco to purchase stock, willing to pay premium prices for animals that bore the Houston Ranch brand. The cattle herd grew large enough that they hired their first hand, a young man named Peter who proved to be hardworking and trustworthy. On their 5th anniversary, Zachary took Violet back to Empire City, to the spot where they'd first met on that dusty street. The town had grown and changed, but the memory was still vivid for both of them. I was standing right there, Violet said, pointing, feeling like my whole world was ending, and then you asked if I was all right and everything changed. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you that day, Zachary said, pulling her close. Changed my whole life, gave it meaning and purpose. You ever miss it? Violet asked. The drifting, the freedom of not being tied down. Not for a second, Zachary said firmly. I've got everything I ever wanted right here. A home, a family, work that matters, and a woman I love more every day. That's worth more than all the freedom in the world. They stood there in the street, older now and bearing the marks of hard work and parenthood, but with eyes that still shone when they looked at each other. Passers-by smiled at them, recognizing the couple whose love story had become part of the town's folklore. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another son, William, arrived when James was 5 and Alina 3. Then a second daughter, Catherine, 2 years later. The house that had seemed so spacious when they'd first built it had to be expanded, with Zachary adding rooms and a proper second story to accommodate their growing brood. Violet's mother lived to see all 4 of her grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. Surrounded by the family she'd feared she'd never live to see. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree, with a headstone that read Catherine Marie Reeves, beloved mother and grandmother. Violet grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that her mother had lived to see her so happy, had known her grandchildren, had been part of the life they'd built. James grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, showing a natural talent for working with horses that made Zachary's heart swell with pride. Alina proved to have her mother's head for numbers and business, taking over the account books when she was barely into her teens. William was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book when he should have been working, but with a kind heart that endeared him to everyone. Catherine, the youngest, was fearless and adventurous, able to ride before she could properly walk and determined to prove she could do anything her brothers could do. Zachary and Violet watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing. But they never took a single day for granted, never forgot how close they'd come to never meeting at all. Every anniversary, they made a point of telling the story to their children, how a desperate young woman and a kind stranger had found each other in the dusty streets of Empire City and built something lasting from that chance encounter. The ranch became one of the most successful in Nevada, known not just for quality livestock, but for the integrity of its owners. Zachary had a reputation for honest dealing and fair prices, never taking advantage even when he could have. Violet was known for her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need, never forgetting what it felt like to be desperate and alone. When James turned 18, Zachary officially made him a partner in the ranch, recognizing both his hard work and his dedication. It was a moment of profound pride for both father and son, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. Alina, 15 by then, was made the official bookkeeper with a salary of her own, acknowledging her contributions to the ranch's success. On their 20th anniversary, Zachary and Violet sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley they'd claimed as their own 2 decades ago. Their 4 children were scattered around the property, James working with a particularly spirited young stallion in the corral, Alina going over accounts in the office Zachary had built for her, William reading under a tree by the stream, Catherine helping the ranch hands with the evening chores even though she was only 10 and should have been getting ready for bed. "Can you believe it's been 20 years?" Violet asked, leaning against Zachary's shoulder. "Some days it feels like yesterday," Zachary said, Other days I can barely remember what life was like before you, before all this. You have any regrets? Violet asked. Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering. Only one, he said finally. I regret that I can't go back and tell that young cowboy riding into Empire City 20 years ago just how good his life is about to get. Save him some of the worry about whether he's making the right choice. Violet laughed. I regret not trusting you sooner. If I'd swallowed my pride and asked for help earlier that day, we might have had a few more hours together. We've got the rest of our lives, Zachary said, kissing the top of her head. That's more than enough for me. As night fell over the ranch, the family gathered for supper, filling the large kitchen with noise and laughter and love. Zachary looked around the table at the faces of his wife and children, at the life they'd built together from nothing but hope and hard work, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. After the meal, when the younger children had been sent to bed, and James and Alina were finishing up the day's chores, Zachary and Violet returned to the porch. The desert night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago. I never thanked you properly, Violet said softly. For what? Zachary asked, puzzled. You thank me about 3 times a day for something. For seeing me that day. For not walking past like everyone else did. For stopping and asking if I was all right when you had no reason to care about a stranger's troubles. Violet, you don't need to thank me for that. Meeting you, helping you, it was the best thing I ever did. You gave me purpose, family, love. I should be thanking you. Then let's just agree we're both grateful, Violet said, snuggling closer to him. Grateful for each other, for our children, for this life we've built. Grateful for second chances and unexpected kindness. I can agree to that, Zachary said. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Inside the house, they could hear Alina's voice as she read a story to Catherine, the younger girl's delighted laughter at some part of the tale. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special or remarkable, but that was what made it perfect. This was the life they'd built together, solid and real and lasting. From a moment of desperation on a dusty street had come all of this. A home, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As they finally rose to go inside, Zachary pulled Violet close one last time. I love you, he said. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as I'm breathing. I love you too, Violet replied. My cowboy, my savior, my partner in everything. They walked into the house together, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, secure in the knowledge that as long as they had each other, they could handle anything. The door closed behind them, and the lights in the windows glowed warm against the desert darkness, a beacon of home and love and belonging. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes that time always brings. James married a schoolteacher from Empire City and brought her to live on the ranch, where she proved to be a perfect match for the quiet, steady young man he'd become. Alina, to everyone's surprise except her mother's, opened a store in town that quickly became the most successful mercantile in Empire City, her head for business serving her well. William eventually left for university back east, the first of their children to pursue formal education, though he promised to return. Catherine grew into a beautiful young woman who could outride any man in the territory and had no shortage of suitors, though she declared regularly that she had no intention of marrying until she found someone who loved ranching as much as she did. Zachary's hair turned gray at the temples and then white, his face weathered by decades under the Nevada sun. But his eyes remained as warm and kind as they'd been the day he'd stopped to help a desperate young woman. Violet aged gracefully, her beauty deepening rather than fading, her strength evident in every line of her still proud carriage. They became grandparents when James and his wife welcomed twin boys, and Zachary took to the role with enthusiasm, teaching his grandsons to ride and rope just as he'd taught their father. Violet delighted in having babies in the house again, even if they went home at the end of the day. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. All 4 of their children were there, along with James's wife and the twins, now 3 years old and into everything. Even William had made the journey back from his university, bringing with him a young woman he introduced as his fiancée. As Zachary looked around at the assembled family, at the tables laden with food, at the children playing in the yard, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, every bit of it, had started with a simple choice to help someone in need. It could so easily have gone differently. He could have walked past Violet that day, could have told himself her troubles weren't his concern, and he would have missed all of this. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked, appearing at his elbow with a cup of cold water. "Just counting my blessings," Zachary said. "Seems like the older I get, the more I have to count." "We've been lucky," Violet agreed. "Blessed, really. Not many people get to build a life like this." "It wasn't luck," Zachary said. "It was work and love and stubbornness, refusing to give up even when things got hard. And kindness," Violet added. "It all started with kindness, with you choosing to help when you didn't have to." "Best $7 I ever spent," Zachary said with a grin. Violet laughed and took his hand, the gesture as natural after 30 years as breathing. "Come on, old man. Your grandchildren want you to tell them the story again, about how you saved their grandmother's life and swept her off her feet." "I seem to remember you doing some of the sweeping," Zachary protested, but he allowed her to lead him over to where the family was gathered. As the sun set on their 30th anniversary celebration, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold, Zachary held his youngest grandson on his knee and told the story one more time. About a young cowboy riding into a dusty town, about a desperate woman with nowhere left to turn, about how sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of entire lives. The children listened with wide eyes, even though they'd heard the story dozens of times before. Because it wasn't just a story to them. It was their history, their legacy, the foundation of everything they knew and loved. Without that chance meeting on that hot afternoon in Empire City, none of them would exist. The ranch wouldn't exist. This whole beautiful, complicated, wonderful family wouldn't exist. When the story was finished and the children had been sent to bed, when the stars had come out and the night air had turned cool, Zachary and Violet found themselves alone on their porch once more. It had become their favorite place, this spot where they could sit and watch their world go by, where they could talk or simply be silent together. 30 years, Violet mused. When I was 22, standing on that street corner, sure I was about to lose everything, I couldn't have imagined this. Any of this. "I know what you mean," Zachary said. "I was so lost back then, didn't even know I was searching for something until I found you." "We found each other," Violet corrected gently, "and we built this together, every bit of it." "Together," Zachary agreed. "That's the only way anything worth having ever gets built." They sat in comfortable silence as they had thousands of times before, watching the moon track across the sky, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept safely, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. Beyond the house, The horses and cattle they'd worked so hard to raise grazed peacefully in the darkness. It was a good life, Zachary thought. A life worth living, worth fighting for, worth all the hardships and struggles they'd faced along the way. From that first desperate moment when Violet had needed help and he'd chosen to give it, every day had been building toward this. Toward this family, this home, this deep and abiding love that had sustained them through everything. No regrets, Violet asked, as if reading his thoughts. Not a single one, Zachary said firmly. Only that we can't live it all over again, Violet said with a smile. But I suppose once is enough when you do it right. We did do it right, didn't we? Zachary said, pulling her close. We did, Violet confirmed. We really did. As they finally rose to go inside, to their bed and their rest after a long day of celebration, Zachary paused and looked back at the valley spread out below them. Their valley, their ranch, their legacy. All of it born from a single moment of compassion on a dusty street 30 years ago. He thought about that young man he'd been, drifting and searching without knowing what he was looking for. He thought about the scared young woman with her dying mother and no hope left. And he marveled at how two broken pieces had come together to make something whole and beautiful and lasting. Inside, Violet was already preparing for bed, humming softly to herself. Zachary closed the door behind them and locked it, sealing them safely inside their home for another night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, he was content to simply be here, with the woman he loved, in the life they'd built together from nothing but hope and hard work and kindness. As he lay down beside Violet and felt her nestle against him the way she had for 30 years, Zachary sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for love that endured, for the courage to stop and help a stranger when the easiest thing would have been to walk away, for every day that had led to this moment, and for all the days yet to come. Outside, the desert stars shone down on the Houston ranch, where a family slept peacefully, secure in love and home and belonging. And if those stars could have spoken, they might have told of the countless other souls who had passed beneath them over the years, most of them forgotten, lost to time. But some stories, the truly special ones, they endured, passed down from generation to generation, growing richer and more meaningful with each telling. This was one of those stories. The story of Violet and Zachary, of desperate need met with compassion, of strangers who became lovers and then partners for life. It was a story that would be told long after they were gone, inspiring their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to live with kindness and courage and open hearts. But for now, on this perfect night at the end of their 30th anniversary, the story was still being lived, still being written in every breath they took together, every moment they shared, every sunrise they witnessed over the land they'd claimed as their own. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything,